Hello everybody, welcome back to Gelvin Valley, Farming Simulator 15, app created by Wild Wild Wes. We are enjoying the views up top here. It's a long ways down. There we go, waiting for my mower to go down. We are on a treacherously steep hill where we are allowed to cut the grass on behalf of local magistrate. And whoever cuts the grass up here, they say, we are welcome to the hay. The only thing they don't cover is an insurance policy in case anything happens on this hill. We are at our own risk, as they say. Fortunately, we have a good insurance policy, and we have enough intestinal fortitude to take on this hill. Oh, the things we'll do in a game that we would never attempt in a million years in real life. I'm not sure I could be paid enough to try to cut hay on this tight kind of a hill. I think I mentioned in the last episode that doing this was bringing back memories of when I did some haying as a younger guy, when I worked on Lone Oak Farms and worked for my father. And a lot of that was some good old-fashioned hard sweaty work because we had to handle all of those as small bales and we didn't always have equipment to do it. You know, something I remember quite a bit too, particularly if it was wet or the hay had been rained on, is the use of salt. I don't know if anybody listening here, did you ever salt your hay? I guess the idea was to prevent a fire and maybe the animals like it too, I don't know, probably makes them thirstier and all get out. But we would put a lot of salt on the hay, layer by layer as we stacked it in the barn. Not always, like I say, I think it was on particularly wet years where maybe we were putting it up because rain was threatening and it just hadn't had enough time to dry. And I don't know how the chemistry or the science works on it. It just baffles me, or it seems counterintuitive. I mean, I know it works because I've seen it with my own eyes, what can happen. And I think all of us have. You know, all of us maybe have seen a compost pile before where you take all this stuff and you put it out on a pile and it generates heat. And it can be hot inside the O's, and that's part of the power of composting as it breaks down material. And I think it's the same dynamics that can happen in a barn when you put up hay that is wet and you stack it in tight and somehow the water generates heat. And I don't, like I say, it seems totally counterintuitive. But I know here a few years ago, my father almost lost a barn. He went in there and he smelled something funny up in the hay mow. And he had to go up there and literally start tearing some of the stacks apart. And it involved a ton of physical labor just to try to open it up, air it out, and separate some of these stacks of bales, you know, that were very close to starting on fire. And like I say, I can't explain, nor do I know how exactly that works in terms of the science behind it. You know, I just know that it does. So many times over the years, we would be sprinkling salt over the bales as we stacked them in the barn, just to help give something there to absorb any water or to somehow wick the moisture out of the bales, and the moisture would get absorbed into the salt and stay out of the bales, and that, we think, helped prevent fires. I'm just curious if any of you all have used that technique before, if any of you have worked on a farm, and whether it's ultimately worked, or conversely, if any of you have seen a barn go down because of wet hay. I'd be curious about that too. I have memories as a kid of, I think it happened around Christmas. There was a local haying contractor, and I don't think it was wet hay that took down his barn, but I almost think he had a shop maybe in part of the barn, and there was some welding sparks that settled in some flammable stuff and then sat there overnight and eventually ignited. And so there was some oil barrels and things in there that were combustibles, and it just, I'll never forget seeing in the dead of night, well, not the dead of night, it wasn't totally the dead of night, we were out Christmas caroling, a group of us. We were being hauled around in a farm truck of all things, and we were just traveling from one place to another and came upon this barn. I mean, the flames were just shooting up into the air. Fire department was there, but it was so hot, it basically would be impossible to put out. And anybody that's ever come upon a burning stack of hay or straw, I say from my own experience, you just as well let it burn out. There ain't enough water in the world to put it out, and yeah, you'll just drive yourself to frustration trying to put it out. You just will let it burn on its own, because you aren't going to be able to do it. And that's kind of how it was here. It was a total loss. The building went down. There's no way, I don't care how good the fire department is, or if you called every fire department in the country, I don't think their equipment could hold enough water to put out a barn full of hay, literally full. This was a massive barn. So, but like I say, in his case, I don't think it was wet hay that caused it, but I know wet hay can indeed be a cause of barn fires. We almost had it happen here, and like I say, we've all maybe observed the dynamic of compost and how it just generates heat somehow when you have wet cuttings and moisture in there. It somehow is able to develop heat. Like I say, it's just so counterintuitive, because everybody knows you use water to put out fires. So how is it then that something wet can cause a fire? So I can't explain it. All I know is that it does. So maybe someone else can explain it in the comments who's way smarter than I am. Hey, we're down to just a small little triangle here on this piece. Then we're going to be out tedding it. And turning it into bales eventually. Obviously we're taking on a bigger piece here than we did kind of at the other place, the other hill that we did. Maybe I should have been a bit more aggressive with how much I cut kind of at the other place. But I don't know. This will be kind of just a little diversion. Like I say, we're mainly kind of in an intervening period here, waiting for our crops to ripen. So I just figured we would do a little hay work before we had to dig the combine out and start another grain harvest. I'm kind of curious. Let me check I see it's cloudy weather. Let me see. Do I have the mod in? No, maybe I don't. I thought I had a mod that would tell me how long I have until the next rain, but I can't seem to get it to activate, so maybe I took that out. My little weather helper. The other thing this makes me think of in terms of the hay isn't so much even hay, it's farming accidents. And I'm pretty sure I had an episode where we talked about that, and just made me think of it again. I can't remember if I shared the story before or not, but things just happen on a farm. I mean, there's injuries, and some of it maybe, I mean, I probably wasn't the most careful as I should have been. You always look back and wonder what you should have, could have done differently, in a given situation. And fortunately, made it through. There's lots of farmers, that have hurt themselves, and it can be life changing, just in an instant. I knew a preacher one time who was a farmer who had round bales, and I think he lifted one up on his front end loader, and somehow he didn't have it attached properly on the front end loader, and so when he lifted it into the air, as I understand it, the bale came rolling down the rails of the front end loader, right, and it was an open air tractor. There was no cab or nothing to stop it, and the bale just came and ran him over on the seat and bent him over backwards and broke his back. That made him a paraplegic. That simple little thing, and he's still living, I think, and he's probably thought about that every day, wishing he would have done things just a little bit differently that day. Things can just happen in a split second, and before you know it, your life is changed. And I just feel fortunate I didn't have anything like that happen to me on the farm, but sure could have. But one thing that I did do, oops, let me just turn this thing off. Oh, it must be the sound of a plane. Wind is blowing. Let's come over here, get spread out, and get going. We had a load of hay, and I think in the last time I explained the bale accumulator, and these would be picked up by the tractor and a front end loader and loaded onto the back, the flatbed of a truck. Just a standard old grain truck, nothing fancy. It's what we used on the farm. We weren't hauling grass seed with it. We would take the rails off of it, and it would be just a flatbed, and we could haul bales and whatnot on it. So they weren't, I think I mentioned we wouldn't put bales on there the same way when we would hand stack the truck. These were just put on there with the front end loader, and as you can see, all the bales would be pointing the same direction. The load may not be tied in the best as it might be if we did it by hand. There's other techniques you can do when you stack it by hand to make sure your load isn't going to topple over when you head on down the road with it. And we would fudge a few of those things when we were just loading it, using the front end loader. So you always had to be careful when you were unloading it, because it was all by hand. One of the first things you would do is go on top of the truck, on top of the stack, and we would use a couple come-alongs along with a little bit of chain to kind of hold the load together. It was just fore and aft, if you will, front and back on the truck. I don't think we put anything on the sides, but we would just cinch it down tight up there. And so the first order of business, once we got to where we were going to unload the bales, was someone climbed up there and released the tension on the come-alongs that we used up there. And usually that went just fine, but it just kind of was just sitting there. It isn't like it's going to move, so you'd release the tension, and then the next thing to do was to get rid of the chains, pick up the come-alongs, deal with those, so you could get going to the business of unloading the hay. Well, so we had this truck backed into the red barn. It was kind of on the south end of it. We were going to put it up in a hay mow that it had in there. It had all sorts of nooks and crannies where you could put bales and that kind of thing in there. So we just backed it up. There was a, matter of fact, in the Lone Oak map, he maybe even has a hay mow door up there. Not sure you can store any bales up there in the game version, but anyway, he may have it on there. So we backed the truck up there, and I was up on top. I had taken the come along off and got rid of all the chains and lines or whatever we used to kind of cinch the load down. And then I walked to the back of the load up on top. And all of a sudden, I just fell. And I went straight down back of the truck and landed next to the building foundation. It was a fall of, I don't know what it is to the top of the load. Maybe 10 feet, 12 feet. From a standing position up there, the bales just gave away. And they weren't tied in very well, kind of like I explained earlier, just using the front end loader to stack them. And just down I went. And I was totally unhurt. Totally unhurt. The only thing damaged was my pride, I guess, if anything was hurt, because you look like an idiot when you fall off of something. But I could have bashed my head on the flatbed edge of the truck on the way down. I'd missed it entirely. So I could have hit myself on the building. There was tin on the building, and the tin siding sometimes had frayed edges, and I could have cut myself on that. Nothing. I missed it entirely. And there was just enough of a gap that I slipped down in between, and there was even some sand kind of around the foundation on the bottom that I landed in, so it wasn't even hard area to fall into. And right next to me, get this, there was a pipe near the foundation sticking straight up. I don't know what the pipe was for, but I missed that too. I mean, just landed perfectly, and it could have been so bad. Or cut myself up, bash my head, and worse would have been landing on that pipe and impaling myself on it or something. And I'm thankful looking back, nothing happened. But I should have been more careful when I was up on top of those bales, recognizing it isn't like you're walking on something stable, to remember you're walking on bales. But it's one of those things, when it comes to farming accidents, if you talk to some of those guys that have had them, it's like, well, I did it before 1,000,000 times and nothing bad happened. And I could say the same thing too. It wasn't the first time that I'd been up there and, uncinched the come-alongs and what have you. It wasn't the first time at all. So, oops. Let me make sure I stayed down. But you never know. That's why you got to be careful. Something can happen and you're not expecting it. And I'm just thankful that nothing bad happened, in that particular farming accident. There were others, where other things happened. And I know my brother, I think I had another episode kind of dedicated to that. He tangled with an auger and got his hands kind of down in it. He's just fortunate to have his fingers. The guy's a computer engineer now. And I don't know what he would have done if his fingers would have been taken off by that auger. So you just can't be too careful with a lot of these things, even in haying, in something where I wouldn't have thought that would be an area where something bad could potentially happen. But yeah, when it does, and you reflect on it a little bit, about gives you the jitters. When you start thinking through all the things that could have happened, but fortunately didn't. As I think on it now here too, there's something else that we didn't really ever do, or only did rarely, and that is run a tedder in the hay. And it's probably because where I live, we tend to have fairly dry summers. We usually, to make hay, what the guys will do is they will cut it and crimp it. They run it through crimping rollers right behind the cutter. They let it lay in the sun where it will dry thoroughly. And usually that only takes a day, maybe 2, as long as there's no rain. And then the next step is they rake it into a windrower and they bring in the baler. So occasionally, and I don't think Lone Oak even owned a tedder now that I think about it, but there were a few times kind of in the early spring before summer hit full or in earnest where you could get some amount of rain. And so if the hay ever got rained on, unfortunately, or if you wanted to try to hurry up the drying process because rain was coming, that's when the tedder would be brought in. Otherwise, it was hardly ever used, or I can only think of once when I worked up there over the what was it, 7 years that I was up there. I can only think of once where they had a tedder brought in, at least that I remember. Maybe there was other times, but we just generally didn't have it, and I know that's kind of provoked some discussion with the farm sim game. Yeah, I know there's a friend of mine. I haven't touched base with him quite some time. His name is Hoot. Met him on the FSUK forum, but I think it was similar for where he grew up and where he worked on haying. He says, hey, we don't have to use a tedder to make hay. But I think some of it in here is just also, the textures are obviously changing from the green to the flatter green, if you will, the dried out version of the hay. So I think part of it is just getting the hay into a different condition in here that it's set up for baling versus cutting it and then baling it, and it doesn't look like anything's changed. So what this is really doing, and as we watch the textures change as we drive along this hill, it's kind of mimicking the process that happens when the sun bleach dries all the hay and gets it ready so you can bale it. Boop. Did I leave some in there? Kind of hard to back this thing up. And nowadays on Lone Oak, maybe they still have their small baler. I think they do. Yeah, they do, because my father borrows it, I think, every single year to put up his own stuff. I question whether they use it very much anymore, because they have changed kind of how they feed their cattle down there and in the canyon, like I mentioned before. Now, I think they put big bales down there, and they have a forklift they keep down there to handle all the lifting. So it's just another one of those things that got mechanized over the years, and now they don't have to rely as much on human muscle power to move things around down there. And you know what? That's probably for the best. Probably for the best. There's a lot of farmers back in the day, but farmers have this reputation of working really hard, and, well, they do, especially during certain times of the year. And some of it was this, lots of physical labor, and, as a guy gets older, it gets harder to put in that kind of labor. Particularly when it's in the hot sun. And I have memories of doing the hay in the hot sun. I have memories of picking up rock in the hot sun. I know we've talked about it before. I made a mod, one of the first mods that I ever made had to do with rocks. And it's, when you run tillage equipment, I know we've seen it in here, it's Farm Sim 15, and you dig up rocks. That's exactly what happened in real life on Lone Oak and happens to this day. It's just when you stir the soil, rocks are going to come up, and then you got to go pick them up if they're big enough to warrant it. I just remember back in the day, it wasn't so much that it was hard work or that the rocks were particularly heavy. You could get a boulder or something in there, and where you needed the front end loader to help you get it out, or where you needed some extra strength at a particular moment to get it into the bucket or whatever. But I tell you, even just walking in the field beside the tractor, periodically picking up some rock when it's in the hot summer heat, when you do that, there's something about working in the heat that just saps the energy out of a person, or at least it always did to me. Maybe some people thrive on that. I don't know. But hay could be the same way, so it was always good to keep some fluids close so you could replenish those in between the loads and try to maintain your energy. Does anybody have secrets on how to keep your energy up? I know as I get older, I'm no longer doing some of the physical exercise, and probably it's doing some of that exercise that helps a guy keep your energy up just in the act of doing it. And if you don't, well, that kind of counterintuitively robs a person perhaps of energy also. Like I say, it's been a while since we've been up here. I'm really enjoying this, and we are almost done with tedding this speck of real estate up here, and are ready to head home and go get the baler and the windrower. And hopefully we'll be able to windrow everything up so we don't leave anything behind, and turn everything into a bale. There we go. Got it. Maybe keep it on while we're coming up here. Sometimes it does a pretty good job catching most of it. Sometimes the grass can lurk. There we go. Maybe we'll lead home with this one this time instead of the other guy. Probably follows a little bit better. Crank her up, Charlie. Follow. We'll head on up here and we'll head down the mountain. You know, in the newer versions of Follow Me, I think what the tractor ahead does, the one behind does, you know, in terms of turning on beacons or indicator lights. Is it coming? Yep, it's coming. Okay, it didn't tangle with the fence. Down the mountain we'll go. I don't know that we charge down the hill this fast. If this was in real life. You know, that's even bringing up some memories too. Not with hills this extreme, but when I was on Lone Oak, I mean, that's where I learned everything, the little bit that I do know about farming and farm machinery, and you know, I learned there. And one of those things was in how to use a truck's engine to help you slow down when you're going down slopes and that kind of thing. For a while, I would, you know, heading down a hill, I would push in the clutch and use the brakes to slow down the truck until my uncles noticed and said, hey, you know, stop doing that. Don't push in the clutch. You can still press on the brake. For some reason, I had it in my head that you couldn't push on the brake unless you pushed on the clutch, you know, and disengaged somewhat. But they said, nope, use your engine to help slow you down. And yes, it's okay to push on the brake even though you don't have the clutch pushed in. So yeah, just little stuff like that you could learn on the farm, and that lesson was painless enough. But some of the others, oh my goodness, I just made so many mistakes. It's a wonder my uncles never fired me from working up there as I look back. I really tested their patience, I think, in many regards. Yeah, another one with a hay truck. I had changed the oil in it, and every time you change the oil, of course, you change the filter. So I took the filter off and put a new one on like I was told and tightened her down, and I figured we were ready to go. Well, we head down over the hill, and somebody noticed, this after we put oil back in and everything, but somebody noticed it was dripping oil. Quite a bit, actually. So they stopped, and they looked at the filter, and I hadn't put it on quite right. And ever since, it's not very often, that I change oil anymore, but ever since that happened, I've learned that when you take a filter off, you just, turn it by hand. I mean, it's just really easy. You don't hardly need any equipment to do it. Always, 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 I check for the rubber gasket on the machine to make sure it isn't peeled off. There goes our bell. The mistake I made that particular time, and the reason it was leaking, is there was still a rubber gasket from the previous oil filter on that truck, and I didn't know. I took the filter off, figured I had everything, I slapped a new one up there. Well, now there's two gaskets, and the gaskets aren't designed to stop oil from coming out, the two of them together. It's supposed to be metal and gasket. So that's just one little other tidbit that I picked up with the humble hay truck. I'm just glad someone noticed and that it didn't bleed all the oil out and then wreck the engine. That could have been a very costly mistake, but fortunately it wasn't. I think I learned a lesson that day. Well, and here we are back at the farmyard. So we'll get things swapped out and get ready to head on back up the hill and bale the place. Thank you all for coming along for the ride. You all have a wonderful day, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.